Hello, people of the internet. I am Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and welcome to the supposed temporary who knows finale of Godzilla in animation, which is Matt Denny and I's look through the history of Godzilla in all of his animated incarnations throughout the decades. We have looked at particular inspirations of Godzilla with the Arctic Giant. We have gone through the Hanna-Barbera era. We have looked through the oddity of Godzilla. We have seen the fan favorite Godzilla the series and more throughout this journey. And now we have come to the end of what was the inspiration of this retrospective, which is the Godzilla anime trilogy. The third and final film of said trilogy, Godzilla the Planet Eater. And of course, as I mentioned before, I couldn't have done this entire journey without my good buddy here, kaiju novelist, Mr. Matt Dennian.
Thank you so much, Andres. And thanks everybody who stuck with us through this entire journey. I know the first 2/3 of it was a blast, and this last third for a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us, has been a bit arduous, shall we say, as we get into the Godzilla anime. However, if I may, before we get into that,
Sure.
And if I may not, I'm going to do it anyway, a huge congratulations to you on your first published work.
Oh, thank you very much, man. And I wouldn't have done it, of course, without you. So for those who don't know what we're talking about, in the time between our last collaborative video and now, Matt Denny and I have actually worked on a comic where we take our respective signature characters, Draco Azul for me, Atomic Rex for him, and reinterpreted them into film noir detectives in a world run by mechs and monsters. And we kind of sort of also made this into, we turned this subject in, which was actually inspired by the title card to our film noir reviews, and translated that into a short 10-page mini comic, which also ties in to a larger story that we have in the works for our ongoing charity, Kaiju vs. Cancer. And that novel, or this comic being Draco Azul Atomic Rex, Shadow of the Raptor, which is available now on Amazon for only $2 for all Kindle devices digitally. We tried looking into getting a physical release, but I believe you told me that there were a few complications there, Matt. So in the meantime, we're doing this solely digitally. So if you have an iPad, a laptop, a smartphone, any sort of Kindle reading device, you can read it, and it's only $2. So we appreciate it if you check it out, let us know what you think, and leave a review, especially on the Amazon page itself.
Yes, I'll just add, we will get some kind of paper thing out when we get it out. There's problems with Amazon right now. But more importantly, first, a big shout out to our good friend Frank Parr, who not only did the original title card, but did the entire artwork and grayscale for this. He did a fantastic job. And if you do decide to spend only your minimal $2 on this, we only plug it a lot because it goes to help our friend Chris Martinez, creator of Fire Beast Oregon, in his fight with cancer. So you and I have decided that on all of the money we make from this project will go to help Chris out. So
right, we are not profiting off of this project of ours. This is all done out of the love for our friend Chris.
Right. So I'm sorry to jump off that, but I do want to congratulate you. This is your first published work, if I'm not mistaken, and it's a very cool thing.
Right.
And
I guess first published work as a writer. The last 3 published works I've been a part of, thankfully, have been contributing as an editor. But yeah, this is my first time being my own published work where I created the story itself, or had a part in creating the story itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that out there for you, but let us move on to Godzilla, the Planet Eater.
Right. By the way, doesn't Godzilla the Planet Eater kind of sound a bit of an awkward title? I mean, I would have been fine with Godzilla with a strict, not strict, but of the other translations, like Godzilla Planet Eater or Godzilla Star Eater. Just calling it Godzilla the Planet Eater makes it sound like Godzilla, he is the one eating planets.
Oh, right. It's specifically how they refer to, say, Galactus in the Marvel Universe. Galactus, the Planet Eater. Do you know what I mean? It makes it sound like Godzilla is the one eating planets.
Yeah. So. But who knows? It's already done and over with. And so the faster we can get through this, the faster we can finally rid ourselves of the trilogy, which, spoiler alert, Matt and I have not been fans of this particular experimental trilogy for a multitude of reasons. And that has sort of been the case for a lot of Godzilla fans, where this, we'll say, right off the bat that we appreciate all the very interesting, weird, wild, and out there ideas that the anime trilogy attempts to pull off. But unfortunately, as was the case with all three films, we feel like the actual execution of these great ideas was very, very lacking. And because of the very experimental nature of this trilogy, there has been a wide variety of reactions from many Godzilla fans. There are people who like the trilogy, people who hate the trilogy, people who like some parts but hate other parts, and that is perfectly fine. We have no issue if you like the movies or if you don't like the movies. Of course, the whole movie-going experience is entirely subjective. I feel like there is no right or wrong answer in how you are supposed... There's no right way to enjoy a movie. It all boils down to the individual viewer on a case-by-case basis. So it's like, if you disagree, that's perfectly fine. If you think this movie is really great, that's awesome. But for us, we just didn't like them, and certainly wasn't our cup of tea. We preferred. We don't hate it because it's different per se. We don't like these movies for the reasons we will state in the actual review itself. So, like any review, we hope to elaborate on our opinions and hopefully enough give a good enough argument for why we think the anime trilogies, at least in this case the finale of the trilogy, turned out the way that it did.
Yeah, and we'll get into all that because I have a lot of thoughts about that people don't like this because it's different spin. But I guess we'll talk about the film first, then we'll get into all the other stuff and the confusion with what the director and the writer are saying and Toho.
Oh, yeah. In fact, I will say this right off the bat, that the who's, what's, and why's, the whole behind-the-scenes development that would led to the end result is far more interesting than the movies themselves. It's like
truly it is.
Trying to piece together exactly how this trilogy turned out the way that it did. All of that is to me personally, is a much more interesting subject material than the movies themselves. It's like,
to be fair, that's a really low bar though to be more interesting than the movies.
So, going into Godzilla the Planet Eater. So this is the third, as we said, the third and final installment of the Godzilla anime trilogy that began with 2017's Godzilla Planet of the Monsters and later continued with early 2018's Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle. And now we come across Godzilla the Planet Eater, which came out in November of 2018 and worldwide on Netflix January 9th, 2019. And so we continue off from where the last film left us, where we had the destruction of Mechagodzilla City, where Haruo had to make a decision between letting Mechagodzilla City kill Godzilla at the cost of perhaps his humanity and allowing the nanometal to potentially take over the world, in the same manner that Godzilla and his kaiju brethren did. But of course, he chose the opposite and sacrificed the Bilosaludos, the Mechagodzilla City, the Nanometal, the Vulture Mechs, and his sort of love interest, Yuko, in order to save the world and allow Godzilla to live. So now he is living with, he is going through suffering the consequences of his actions, where a lot of people are lost, they're desperate, they're hopeless, and a lot more are turning towards Metphies, who is sort of reinterpreting everything as sort of a message from God saying, the reason why Mechagodzilla City fell was because God had much greater plans for us.
Right.
Haruo, he tries to build up Haruo as not a martyr, but sort of like a messiah-like figure. It's like the reason why Haruo survived was not for any technical scientific reason, but rather God chose him to survive so that he can lead us. So he's gaining more and more of the support from the humans and survivors on Earth. in order to have some big plan that he has. Meanwhile, over on the main spaceship where all the rest of the aliens and humans are living on, there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of bickering back and forth. The Billisuludos are offended at Haru's actions and want him to be brought to justice, want him to be executed, but everyone is like, no, man, we kind of agree with what Haru did. And the Billisuludos are like, fine, we're taking our power supply and we're going home with it. And so while all this chaos is going on, again, more and more humans are brought to the to Metphies and the Exif's religion, saying like, oh, don't worry, God is going to solve everything for us. God has finally seen our actions and he's deemed us worthy of finally coming in to save us. And Haru, he has like no idea what to do. He is completely lost. And eventually he finally sees that what Metphies is doing, as he and the rest of the Exifs, or at least the only other Exif we see in this entire trilogy,
right? Because
good Lord knows Toho can't afford to spend the money on another character model besides him and the elderly other Exif. But yeah, supposedly the Exifs have summoned Ghidorah which is their god, they summon him from another dimension because apparently they serve Ghidorah, and they're sort of like the Silver Surfer to Ghidorah's Galactus, where it's like they go out in search of food for their god and want their god to say, hey, we got a nice tasty Godzilla and planet here for you, have at him.
Although their reasoning is far less logical or applicable than the Silver Surfers, which we'll get to. But
oh yeah, we'll get into that because of course this movie is all about, a large chunk of this movie's dialogue is all about pseudo philosophical debating between. It's like, it sounds a lot more interesting than it actually is, but we'll get into that. So
yes,
while Ghidorah is coming in, he's facing off against Godzilla. Godzilla can't do anything to stop Ghidorah, so it's ultimately up to Haru to put a stop to Metphies, which is where the real conflict of the story is about. So it's like these three films, the whole conflict between Haru's struggle to push humanity in the right direction all leads to this climactic showdown between Haru and Metphies. Meanwhile, much like all these other movies, Godzilla and all that monster stuff, the kind of stuff that Godzilla fans are more interested in seeing, is pushed to the background.
Yeah, far to the background.
Yeah.
You need a telescope to see it.
Oh, yeah. So as I mentioned before in my non-spoiler review that this whole entire trilogy was made with the focus of putting the spotlight on the humans, or the humanoid drama, and putting the Godzilla action stuff as far away in the background as possible. That was their intent from the beginning, and it's not an inherently bad idea.
No, it's not. It's just, like you said before, and we've said for the previous two films, it's just not very well executed. In fact, I think when we were talking after you and I had watched the film the other day, you'd put it up on your Facebook post, something along the lines of, we talked about how there's like a lot of content, but not enough depth to any of it.
Right. In a way, it's like there's too much stuff to explore, but at the same time, not enough stuff to get invested for three movies. It's like, it's too much stuff that can't be, too many ideas that cannot be fully explored in these three movies, but at the same time, there's not enough story there to be stretched out to three movies. It's like, there's too much, but not enough at the same time. And what they have here for this human story, we've mentioned from the very first movie, it's essentially a Moby Dick story, where, main character, he's going after this big giant force of nature, this, unstoppable force, an attempt to get sort of revenge on it. And, that could work, but unfortunately we felt like there was so much padding there, and the character felt very stagnant along the way. In the second movie, it's pretty much, and again, more of the same, Captain Ahab, Moby Dick sort of deal, but now we throw a romance in there out of nowhere, and the romantic partner suddenly changes her opinion on nanometal for some, out of nowhere for some bizarre twist, and before we can even properly develop that relationship, it's gone in a blink of an eye. And now for this situation, I feel like a lot of the content, a lot of the character arc, a lot of the large chunk of the journey that this character goes through over his character arc was saved for this movie.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that. Story-wise, it's still not a very good story, but it's the best, I think, of, and I think you said the same, of the three. Right?
Because stuff actually happened.
Right.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the character remained stagnant for the first movie. The character remained stagnant for a good 2/3 of the second movie, only to have a very poorly done love story at the very end. And now we have all the good stuff, quote-unquote good stuff, for the third movie, because it's the end, it's the climax, it's like stuff needs to happen, stuff needs to get resolved. And that's what this whole movie is. But unfortunately, because this is essentially the third act of a 3-act story, this movie just takes that third act, that climax, and stretches it out to a good 40, 60 minutes, because I mentioned it before with you and I commented this as we were watching this together over on Netflix via Skype. It's like this movie felt like it was going on forever and ever and ever. Like, the pacing in this film is atrocious.
It is horrible. We were literally watching it, and it was like, it felt like how much time is left? Oh my god!
It's like it was the part where
time left.
Like, if this was like maybe a 40-minute TV special, this would totally work. But by the time Ghidorah came in, it felt like, okay, this is the climax. There's going to be like a good 10-minute battle, and then things get resolved, right? No, there's still a whole hour left.
Yes, and it was brutal, man. And at least I feel like when we watched the second one, the same method through Skype, there was stuff we could riff on, which was fun. This was just there was nothing we could riff on. There's the one interesting point, kind of like when the religion aspect comes in, that does take like some deep thought, but they, as usual, they don't give you enough of it to really go into depth with it. So
I mentioned before, like, a lot of people are following Metphies religion like a cult, and it felt very much so like how would you call it? What was the name of those people?
We looked like the Heaven's Gate cult. Yeah.
Yes. Given that, I believe you were probably alive to when this happened, or you were much older when this happened.
Yeah.
So, would you mind explaining to our younger viewers what the Heaven's Gate cult was?
Oh God, that makes me feel old. But, so basically, what it was is there was a cult leader who had a bunch of people living under his thrall. So he had completely influenced them to the point where I'm pretty sure he had them like castrate themselves and stuff. So they were doing what this dude said. Mm-hmm. And there was a comet coming around. I think it was the Hale-Bopp comet, and he had basically convinced them that if they were to commit suicide, there was an alien ship behind the Hale-Bopp comet that would absorb their souls into it, and then they'd live happily ever after aboard this alien ship. And like some 24 people bought into this, and they all committed like a mass suicide based on what this guy was peddling. And what you see is,
by the way, I just found out that their headquarters was in San Diego, California.
Oh yeah, not too far from your place, man.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So, but obviously it was a tragedy. And what you saw there, and what kind of plays itself out here, is when people do lose hope and become convinced, whether with evidence or propaganda, that the end is coming, they'll start grabbing at anything that comes around. So the Heaven's Gate instance,
a very fascinating subject to delve into, especially when you're dealing with like these godlike entities, and you have Ghidorah himself, who is treated as that divine intervention.
Right. Which in this universe kind of almost works even more so, because like, let's say the Heaven's Gate cult sees real world tragedy. There's really no evidence for anybody to believe that this is the case. Like, people would look at these the people who did this and think either they're crazy or they'd feel very sad that they're able, that people could fall into this. But in the universe, this fictional universe, like, Godzilla's a real thing. So you can see why people might buy into the fact that, oh, there is higher powers out there that perhaps can save us. And these aliens know what they're talking about. So
right.
That was interesting.
This isn't the first time the aliens have saved them.
Right.
Of course, they gave their assistance back when the whole kaiju apocalypse was happening.
Right. So you can see why people would, especially after the fall of Mechagodzilla City, which was kind of like a false savior for them, and that it was seen as something that could save them, but in actuality, I guess, was a bigger horror than Godzilla, that got toward the end. Why people would buy into this. And they did set up a bit of a dynamic with the remaining blonde guy number one, who was the only scientific person there who can kind of see that these people are being drawn in.
Right, he could see through the bullshit.
Yeah, precisely. Which is very cool. Like, it's something, you can follow, like, a lot in the YouTube community, for instance, on, like, people who are religious zealots, maybe I'll use that word, and people who consider themselves to be more skeptical, and how they view things differently. So that was cool, and it's a very neat societal drama that kind of plays itself out in everyday society in our real world. So it was neat to kind of see it reflected in the story, but as usual, they didn't take it very far.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And I feel like that's perhaps like the best aspect of this movie. And, pretty much anything involving Metphies was easily like the show, like Metphies himself was the show stealer for this movie for me personally, as I stated in my non-spoiler review. He was the best aspect of this whole entire trilogy because you always knew, like, he had this very calm persona even when everyone was panicking around him for the first two movies. Well, for the second movie, he was barely in it to begin with, but when he was there, you thought, okay, something big is happening. And, you always knew there was something there, but you couldn't guess what it was. And, he always seemed like the sort of like Haruo's right-hand man. So to have him betray him and say, oh, I've been actually using you to lead people into this long con game, and eventually, giving them this salvation, at least a salvation in terms of what he interprets, and having him, try to carry on the cycle of death and destruction. It's not surprising because, again, you always knew he had something up. He was always scheming something, but it was very interesting to see how it all played out, how it all finally played out.
Right, in that case it was. In fact, we talk about how Metphies, it seemed just sort of like a pseudonym for Mephistopheles, to say, or a devil-like character, or what people might more know as the Mephisto character from Marvel Comics, where he's more of like a manipulator into getting people to act in what's his best interest or what he's going for.
Oh yeah, totally. He's manipulating people. He's manipulating them into doing his the actions that he wants them to take, but makes it feel like it's their idea, not his.
Right, exactly. Right.
Yeah, and that's like it's always like a very compelling kind of type of villain for me personally, someone who works behind the scenes until the time is right.
No, exactly, definitely, which is was the one interesting thing about this part of the story, I feel like. Yeah,
and as for like the whole pseudo-philosophical speeches that they would make, there's like a lot of that here, and it kind of goes into two problems that I have with the movie. One is one of the biggest rules of storytelling is show, don't tell, and I feel like this movie does, this movie, along with the rest of the trilogy, does a lot of telling, not so much showing, and I feel like that's probably like a budgetary restriction more than a creative decision, where it's like they tell us that things are happening, but we don't actually see them happening. We see people gathering around. We are told by blonde scientist man, Dr. Martin. We're told by Dr. Martin, he gives a lot of exposition as to what Metphies is doing. He's like, oh, he's bringing people to their side. He's making you out into a Messiah, Christ figure, Haruo. A lot of people are getting desperate, but we don't really see enough of that. We see people say, yes, God will save us, but we don't really see any of that devotion beyond that. It's all very, very surface level.
Yes, yeah, just basically people are following Metphies, but you're not seeing people, like you said, performing acts that would indicate that they're completely now subjugated or have bought into Metphies religion.
Yeah, oh yeah. And it's funny enough, like, meanwhile, while, like, this whole, like, the first 20 minutes of the movie take place with them, with this sort of cult forming and the whole drama aboard the big spaceship, meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, what is going on with, like, the Holtua tribe?
Yes.
So, like, we're in this middle of this big giant cavern where you see a lot of these, like, cave openings that are supposedly Holtua homes, and it's fucking empty! There's, like, no one here! And again, probably a budgetary issue not to have like too many people walking around this empty environment, which again has been a consistent problem throughout the entire thing, where you have these dead, empty, and lifeless environments.
And even because it's all caves, like the color scheme and the backgrounds are just boring because you're just looking at the same thing over and over again.
I have a feeling if they have any more than 10 character models at a time, their computer animation computers are probably going to crash.
Yeah, it really seems that way.
But again, going into the hows and whys of this trilogy, trying to figure out why everything is the way that it is. We'll talk about that later. We'll theorize as to why this is the case later.
Yeah, that's so we'll wrap up the story. So on top of this, and then there's this very strange. Go ahead.
I mentioned that there were two problems. One is show don't tell.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. What was the other issue? The issue I had with this is, the pseudo-philosophical speech. So, a lot of people try to say that this is a very, like, a morally ambiguous, fascinating look into morality and humanity and blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, it kind of boils down to optimism versus pessimism.
Yes, definitely.
The Metphies and the Exivs, they are like the universe's ultimate pessimists, where they claim that they've done a lot of calculations and they believe that nothing lasts forever, everything dies, so what's the point of living? And so they decide, we're going to go on a mission we believe death and non-existence is the ultimate salvation, because that's where everything is ultimately going to go. So we're going to have this big-ass monster, glowing tapeworm to do the job for us.
Yeah. Which you can think a lot about.
It's like, it tries to be a lot, it feels like all this pseudo-philosophical talk is trying to be a lot deeper than it actually is.
Yes, yeah, I think you're correct there, because you and I had discussed that this could, in some ways, Metphies' portrayal and the way that he handles his religion could be like a commentary on religion in general, especially from a Japanese perspective, where you would know more about this than I do, but that perhaps there's not a very big religious community in Japan, correct?
Right. I mean, they uphold certain traditions, but they mainly do so out of obligation rather than any sort of actual devotion to it, as far as I can tell. I could be wrong.
Right, and I know I have friends who run the gamut from evangelical Christians to complete atheists, and one of the things that's looked at, and I might be getting too deep with this too, but that there's some people who think that very religious people in some respects look forward to dying because they'll go to a better place. Now that's neither here nor there for me, it's whatever, but if that's kind of what they're going for in the story, they really overplayed that. I feel like with the pessimism in this characters, does that sound accurate to you, or am I
can see that. It's like, maybe it's supposed to be ironic that it's like, oh, we can't wait to die and go to nothingness. Like, most people are like, oh, I can't wait to die so I can go to heaven. No, it's like, oh, I can't wait to die and go into nothingness.
Right, and that's where the pessimism comes in. Like, at least if perhaps like you're under the impression, if you believe that heaven's waiting for you, you can see why there's like this thing waiting for you.
So maybe it's meant to be like this, like, cruel, from the writer's perspective, is meant to be a cruel, pessimistic take on the idea of an afterlife, where it's like, oh, what if we have a religion in which there is no afterlife?
Right, that's what I was going for. Thank you. You put my words, you got my thoughts and put them into much better words. Thank you. That's what I was trying to get at. I couldn't quite think of how to put it together. But yes, I think that's what it was going for. But it also then, like, kind of takes away any of the drive for the character. Because if you're that big a pessimist, why would you bother doing anything anyway if you know the end's just going to come no matter what you do? Do you know?
I guess that is true. It is kind of a bit hypocritical. It's like, what's the point of doing anything if you're gonna die? And yet, you got the Exifs who are on this 20-year. I from what we understand, it's a 20-year journey with the humans just to get them all dead.
Right.
It's like it feels like way too long of a time to reach this sort of conclusion. It's like, why you should have just summoned if I'm sure it was possible. They never tell us how and why the technicals behind summoning Ghidorah, but it felt like it would have been much better to summon Ghidorah right from the get-go.
Right, so their whole plan is, we're just going to die anyway, so let's expedite the process. However, let's take 20 years to get to that.
Yeah, let's get 20 years.
Point.
Let's get 20 years to drive humanity to the point of desperation. Then, as if they weren't desperate already to go into space, then we'll summon Ghidorah. Also,
exactly. Right.
What had happened if they would have found another planet anyways? Then they wouldn't have found. They would have been finally been away from Godzilla. What was Ghidorah gonna feed off of then? Because apparently they wanted Ghidorah to feed on Godzilla.
Exactly, which is why the whole religious connection, where you could go real deep in, like we were a few minutes ago, but it doesn't hold up in this story because why? What about if those old people from the first episode or the first movie had actually found a planet that worked? It's like, then you don't know if there's a giant Godzilla there.
Your whole plan falls apart then, unless he thinks that humanity would eventually repeated the same mistakes. They would have created another Godzilla on that planet, and then we would summon Ghidorah to eat that Godzilla and that planet. But then it's like, it's so long.
If that was the motivation, specifically to eat a Godzilla, let's say, or some other Godzilla.
When we say a Godzilla, we just mean a giant monster.
Right. Some apex monster, whatever works there. But if that was kind of like the end game, it again doesn't fit with the character's pessimistic view of it's better to die quicker because nothing matters anyway. Because then you're still waiting, like millennia in that case, if they land on a whole new planet, like, this will happen eventually to get to where it did. It just doesn't fit the character's, I don't say motivation, like lack of motivation to do that, right?
Let's see. It's just it makes like the whole entire plot retroactively more convoluted than it should have been, I feel.
Right.
And let's see. And I mentioned before, it's like the whole sort of debate is ultimately pessimism versus optimism, where Metphies believes that nothing matters, we're all going to die, so just give into nothingness. Meanwhile, we have Huddle, who's like, no, humanity must survive, we must live, because the point of living is to enjoy life and enjoy all of its rich benefits, rather than just simply accepting death and foregoing all of that. Which is really confusing when we get to the end of the story, but we'll get to that. Again, we'll get to that later.
And a motivation story-wise could have been cleared up a lot easier if the Exifs believed that their lives would have meaning, or that there'd be some kind of afterlife for them if they were to, say, sacrifice a apex kaiju along with a population of people, so that Ghidorah would take them to a better existence, as opposed to, we're just going to die, so let's use this method to die quicker, even though it's going to take a hell of a lot longer.
Right. So it's like, it kind of reminds me of two particular animes that I personally love. One is Evangelion, which, if you haven't seen the end of Evangelion, I would recommend it. I feel like Evangelion does this whole philosophical debate much more. It handles this much better than Godzilla City on the than the Godzilla anime trilogy, where again they talk about the idea of existentialism, the idea of like, what is the purpose of living if all there is to life is pain? But then there's the argument that it's like there's much beauty in life and that it's worth the pain that you go through. Those are ultimately like the themes behind Evangelion. It's like, what is the point of existence? Another thing I can bring up for comparison is Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, where it's the final enemies in that anime are the anti-spirals. In this universe, spiral energy is what continues life progressing forward, like a drill piercing through every obstacle in life. And meanwhile, you have these individuals called the anti-spiral, where it's like, there's no point in evolving. There's no point in progressing. We should all just stay the same. We should all like just, conform to this blank slate of nothingness rather than this sort of like individualistic sort of exploration. All these sort of like, you should do nothing versus you should do something are more explored in a fascinating and more exciting way than anything that this trilogy has to offer. And it's like, that's the thing. It's like, it was able to balance visuals and action and character story arcs and along with its philosophical themes, it's able to balance everything far better than that. Oh, and two more examples. Gundam. Gundam is always battling with the idea of like, should humanity be redeemed, even though it's proved time and time again that humanity is bound for destruction. And meanwhile, the protagonists are like, no, we should give humanity a chance to redeem themselves, even if we are flawed. In the long run, there is still hope to continue. I feel like there's another anime that does this. Oh, Devilman. Devilman is, again, the idea of like, are humans going to end up killing themselves over potentially, finding a way to come together as one. And funny enough, Devilman is another series that manages to do the whole my best friend turns out to be my worst enemy's twist a lot more interestingly than Metphies and Haruo.
Yeah, I'm really familiar with. I know of Devilman, I've seen it, but Evangelion definitely. I'm pretty familiar with that. Into which, yeah, it definitely pulls this off much better. Pulls off the existence versus non-existence, the tying in of religion. They specifically call the monsters angels, right? In at least the English translation, and it comes across better. And the characters are much better developed than they were here. So it's a shame because as you and I were watching this, like I said, like this is kind of interesting. This whole religion, science, I don't say debate, but like different point of view, right? Was very interesting, but they just didn't develop it enough as always.
Oh yeah, totally. And again, it's a very good idea, and especially when they explore the idea of like, is humanity capable of learning from their mistakes? Because that has always been a theme since the very first Godzilla movie, where it's like humanity created this ultimate being of destruction. They, their own hubris, their own ego led to their own suffering with the creation of Godzilla. And even though we never see Godzilla's origin in the anime trilogy, it's implied that it's pretty much the same as before, where it was humanity that brought about Godzilla and the monsters in the first place. And so the idea of like humanity potentially repeating this path again and again and again, or like every sort of humanoid alien being is destined to go on this path of self-destruction, is a fascinating one. And it reminds me a lot of Planet of the Apes.
Yes.
Specifically the novels. The novels implied, the ending of the novel implied that any planet that develops a human or human-like species is bound to destroy themselves and eventually be replaced by ape-like species.
Right. It's a theme in science fiction, over and over again, that any species which is developed to a certain point is bound to destroy itself.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that's a perfect theme to explore in Godzilla itself, because it has already explored that theme to a certain extent in previous incarnations, and to have a little religious type of or like trying to approach this from a pseudo-religious angle is a fascinating one. Again, I really like that idea, and it almost works here. It's just that everything around the theme sort of contradicts it, and it doesn't quite work so well.
Exactly. It's not the theme that's a bad idea. The theme's a great idea. It's the backstory they lay to it. It doesn't lend to the character's motivations towards reaching their ends within that theme.
It feels like this is what happens when you spend so much time on your themes that you let everything slip by and suffer as a result.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
where like you're so concerned with the end game, you let everything else around you fall apart.
Yeah.
Uh,
I can't add much else to it. That's just totally what happened here.
Yeah. So it's like, that is the focus of the movie. That has been the focus of this whole trilogy. And, that's what everything has been leading up to, is this drama, this debate, this philosophical exploration. And it ultimately doesn't quite work the way that it wants to. And that is the focus of this trilogy.
Yeah, totally. And part of the problem with it is trying to, as little as they did, shoehorn Godzilla into this, because you could have done this entire story without Godzilla.
Like, I understand a lot of fans enjoy this series because it's like, oh, this is the first time we've seen Godzilla and this sort of sci-fi, pseudo-philosophical exploration debate thing. We've never seen any of these ideas be applied in this sort of fashion to Godzilla. So it's like there's a lot of fans see this as like there's a very interesting novelty factor to all of this. And I can see why, I can see like, oh, we've never seen anything like this done to Godzilla before. And, I can see why, but it's like, because the Godzilla elements are so minuscule, it doesn't really, that novelty factor doesn't exist for me personally. It's like, oh, wouldn't you like to see Godzilla in a sci-fi setting? Yeah, but if Godzilla's barely in it, it just feels like a generic sci-fi setting. It doesn't really feel like a true blending of both worlds.
No, in fact, in this story that, as we mentioned, it's Ghidorah's being drawn to consume Godzilla and I guess the Earth at the same time. Mm-hmm. And, we focus on Godzilla. The story could have been done just Ghidorah's coming to consume the Earth.
And,
without Godzilla there.
Oh yeah, Godzilla has really nothing to do with this story. You could have just write Godzilla out of the story completely. You could have had Ghidorah just like chomping at the Earth, biting mountains or biting trees or biting the wildlife. And then just have Haruo, face off against Metphies. Haruo eventually overcomes Metphies, and then Ghidorah magically disappears into fairy dust, and the threat is gone forever. You don't need Godzilla at all whatsoever. He's just window dressing at this point.
Totally. And I think, Andres, and I couldn't bring myself to go back and rewatch this, I literally do not think Godzilla moves the entire movie. I think he's just in the one spot. And he takes maybe a step to shoot a breath at Ghidorah, but he's not going anywhere.
Yeah. He really does nothing in this movie. He tries to shoot some laser beams, doesn't work. He tries to go into his, what do you call it, Scarlet Godzilla form, but doesn't work. Right. The only real thing he does is, he slaps Godzilla around like his bitch when Ghidorah is actually, he's able to physically touch Ghidorah.
Right, which again...
it's the most exciting thing we've ever seen Godzilla. No, I still think the ending of Planet of the Monsters is still a much more interesting than the climax of this fight. Quote, fight.
Yeah, if you can call it that. But again, had you removed Godzilla, like let's just take Godzilla out of this picture totally. Let's just say they come back. I think it would have been a much better story to have found, say, Mechagodzilla City. And then even if they didn't have it turn into a giant Mechagodzilla, so that was a problem. When Ghidorah comes, you see Mechagodzilla City, like, take the place of Godzilla, and they have to coordinate with it to fire off lasers at it or whatever, because Godzilla won't move anyway, so you could have a stationary city.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been just as good, if not slightly better.
Right, you're right. You could have had remove Godzilla completely and the story still would have been the same, You just replace Godzilla with the Serva monsters. Right. And, just have humanity searching around they hate how this virus or this monster virus sort of took control of the city, the planet, so they had to leave. They come back, they find out the world's been infected by this monster virus. They fight off the life forms, they find Mechagodzilla City, doesn't work. Or rather, take out Mechagodzilla City, just skip to Ghidorah, and then it's fight off Metphies, the world is safe, and they're just gonna have to live on a planet filled with these monsters. You really could have taken out Godzilla from the get-go. You wouldn't have the Moby Dick to Haruo's Captain Ahab, but you still would have found, I'm sure there's something else for him to grasp onto. And that's essentially it. You can take out Godzilla from this story and barely any of it would change. So
the story could have been get back to Earth. We need to recolonize Earth, no matter, even though it could be potentially hostile.
Right.
No Godzilla necessary.
Yeah, totally. And again, it's just that this is why that the novelty of seeing Godzilla interact with these very radically different, such a radically different environment than we're used to, that novelty factor doesn't entertain Matt and I in particular, because we don't feel it is a true blend of Godzilla with these crazy ideas.
Right. And we know it can work.
Yeah, and again, if this is good enough for you, that is perfectly fine for your enjoyment.
Right. But certainly the idea of putting Godzilla into a novel situation where he hasn't seen him before can work, and specifically in animation. Like, you and I both really enjoyed the Shin Godzilla one that we looked at.
Absolutely ridiculous, but we loved it. Yeah. Again, you and I like Shin Godzilla, which is take Godzilla and put him in the middle of a political drama, a very dry political drama, and we enjoy that. We're fine with experimentation, but whereas we personally felt that Shin Godzilla was like a true blend of styles, this one really didn't for us.
No. And so many, like the way the Hotua were handled, and then that I guess we'll get to that sort of love triangle.
That was like super strange, because it's like, so we have, again, it's a pretty interesting idea to have Haruo being at his lowest and finding comfort in one of the native girls, and eventually they have this what they call way of connecting life. Connecting life is sort of like the most pretentious way you can call having sex.
Yeah, get it on.
Getting it on. Again, I kind of understand where they're coming from, where it's like they're trying to describe sex as a way of bonding, spiritual bonding, which again, I believe in, it's possible that in certain religions, they kind of view sex as, this very personal thing that should be shared between two spirits bonding with one another. I'm sure, I know, of course, you and I are from a Catholic background. They have this sort of idea where it's like sex shouldn't be for anyone. It should be this special thing you hold with your dear beloved one. And they tried to do that, but the whole thing came off a bit awkward. And I know the internet, the Godzilla fan base is already having a lot of fun, having their laughs making fun of the connecting lives line.
But and here's the thing again, where the story doesn't match up with the actions of the characters. So he connects life with the one twin. However,
we can't even tell which one he connects with.
No, we can't, but we know later on he knocks the one up. Yet all of his internal struggles he verbalizes to the other twin, and not the one that he's connected with.
Apparently, so what? Okay, so there's Miana and Mina. However, I'm always forgetting who is who. So I'm just going to say the nice one and the angry one.
That's right.
Throughout the second movie, it seemed like
that's how we refer to you and Denny, by the way, when you guys record.
So when we see Haruo, he's interacting with solely with the nice one, not the mean one. But it turns out in the second movie, I believe, that he's talking to the nice one. The nice one offers to get it on, as Matt says, with him.
Yeah.
And Haruo rejects. Then he wakes up, he sees the angry one, and he's like, "Oh, you're the one who helped me at the beginning of the second movie with all like the red sprinkles on his skin."
Right.
And so I guess he has sex with the angry one. Meanwhile, the nice one becomes the what do you call it? The damsel in distress.
Right.
And so by the end of the movie,
not only that,
he impregnates the angry one, and then he has a heart-to-heart with the nice one.
Yeah, which, if you've ever been in a relationship, if you're sleeping with one girl and emotionally connecting with the other, you're in trouble. Okay, I'm just saying. But, especially if they're twin sisters, I can't imagine that goes over real well. But
maybe they're the kind of people who like to share, Maybe that's the whole to a way.
I guess. But again, it was something that they didn't really connect much on. Meanwhile, first love interest isn't dead, just in some kind of still coma.
Oh
And
yeah. So it's like you could totally write out Yuto. I understand Yuto was there to provide further guilt for Haruo, but given how Haruo already has enough guilt on his hand, already has enough blood on his hands, you could totally remove Yuko from this story completely, and it still wouldn't change. It just serves to prove that City on the Edge of Battle was nothing more than just excess padding.
True, because I got the little bit of a idea that perhaps the Hotua, if let's say that the Metphies is trying to portray, say, a Western religion, if you will, that the Hotua might have been more like an Eastern religion, like Buddhist stand-in or something like that. I'm not really sure of the specific one that could be referenced, but more like if we work with each other, we can be better, as opposed to the pessimistic view of the Metphies religion. But they didn't really play with that much either. They just kind of barely touch on it.
Now, I do want to read one comment that I got from my non-spoiler review. This individual goes by the name of the Nameless One. He mentioned that he theorized that each of the three races in this series, the humans, the Bilosoluto, and the Metphies, and the Exifs, they seem to represent an unbalance of one of the three aspects of life: mind, body, and spirit. Humans are obsessed, I'm quoting him directly, humans are obsessed with the physical body, things like technology, nuclear weapons, etc., and were thus destroyed by an incarnation of destruction. The Bilosoluto were obsessed with the mind and believing that merging with Mechagodzilla would make them perfect, but it would would destroy creativity, and thus nothing would ever be created. And the Exifs were obsessed with the spiritual, and thus realizing, or at least thinking they had realized, that there was an end to everything and the spirit didn't live on forever, deciding that the only true happiness would be destruction, and thus summoned what they thought would be a god to speed up the process. So it's like, it seems like the writer was trying, according to this, to the Nameless One, it seemed like the writer was trying to do something with these three species, of saying, like, and even it's stated in the movie itself, I believe, where it's like humans represent courage, and Bilosoluto represent intelligence, and the Exifs represent spirituality. It's trying to do something where it's like each race is supposed to represent something else, but because the story is so problematic, I feel like that never really came across in my mind.
Right, yeah, I guess you're saying it. If I think about it, I can maybe see where the Nameless One is going with those comparisons. But like you said, it's not executed well. For instance, like if you look at Star Trek, which I know we talked about before in relation to this, they do a much better job of setting up that the humans are the passionate ones, and the Vulcans are the logical ones, and the Klingons are the militaristic ones. Like we're these defined roles about people, races, and then in space having to coexist together, kind of going forward.
Right, as is balanced, as is like balanced unity.
Yes. So,
and that never really comes across because we rarely see any of this sort of exploration, which, by the way, I did want to mention that the whole struggle of on board the big spaceship with all three races, or mainly the humans and the Bilosoluto, I was wanting that from the very get-go. We never really saw how these races interacted with each other in the first and second movie, and finally we get to have this sort of interaction, which was interesting, I would say, only for all of them to die.
Yeah, because again, as soon as it starts getting interesting, they die.
And I made this joke as we were watching the movie together. It's like, oh, we can't have that. That's too interesting. You were like, why can't they do this? Because, Matt, that'd be too interesting. We can't allow that to happen.
And I don't know, if we covered most stuff story-wise, let's get to Ghidorah showing up and
okay, we'll get to Ghidorah. So it's like, again, this movie tries to be more than just the monsters, or tries to be something other than the monsters. The monsters are merely a background set piece, and yet the marketing does the exact opposite of saying, look at Ghidorah, look at this epic battle with Godzilla, what's gonna happen in this clash of titans? And
yeah, it's the epitome of, like, sorry to interrupt you, like a Sci-Fi Channel movie poster thing, where they'll show you like a dinosaur eating somebody on spring break, and then really that you never see a dinosaur in the entire damn movie, except maybe like the very end.
It's like it's the Beast of Hollow Mountain all over again.
Yes, there you go. Good call. Beast of Hollow Mountain. Excellent.
Yeah, yeah. In other words, Z grade Blondie.
Yes.
So I would say I like the very bizarre take on Ghidorah's design. I did warmed up to it, and I do like the very bizarre, more alien-like, less draconian, more tapeworm or serpentine-like, not serpentine, but like more alien take on Ghidorah. Like, you know, the jagged jaws, the jagged shaped jaws. It doesn't really have any teeth. Its mouth just has spikes molded into it. It has multiple eyes. It has all these spikes along its neck. It has a rather traditional body, but still, again, very bony and skeletal and spiky. I do dig it the more I look at it, and I don't mind that it's just 3 necks, because in a way it's like still somewhat looking like Ghidorah while still being a new take on Ghidorah. It feels like a genuine take on having an Elseworld style Ghidorah. And
yeah,
unlike having a Godzilla that looks like a plant but nothing is ever done with it, with that idea whatsoever, it feels like they took advantage of Ghidorah being this abstract, other dimensional, non-corporeal creature, and they went to town with that by going a very simplistic approach. And it's also that idea of they were able to work within their budget. I'm sure it's like maybe they didn't go with a full body design because maybe that would have been too expensive to animate. But so they went with a design that's cheaper but still interesting. I feel like this is when they were actually playing with, going along with their budget, as opposed to doing this big grand scale thing that could not be done within their budget.
I agree with you, and I would say what we see is a different form of Ghidorah. However, it's still, you can look at it and recognize it as a Ghidorah, different from, say, where we didn't get any Mechagodzilla. You know, and it was like, oh, well, but the city, and I know some people will say that's a valid
the city's
Mechagodzilla.
Godzilla.
Yeah, I don't buy that crap. And I actually kind of like that he was more ethereal than physical. So to me, I was watching it, kind of reminded me of like ethereal. Sorry, that's okay. my accent.
Your Joyzy accent.
My Joyzy accent. Hey, I'm not one of those people who, when I screw up, can't admit it. You know, I have to blame it on something else. But that's another story.
I wonder what you're referencing there.
That's a story for another day.
It'll never be told on here.
Yeah. But anyway, it kind of reminded me of, like, say, the Phoenix Force in Marvel Comics, again, where it's not like a solid thing, but it's an energy creature. So I thought that was okay.
That's what I predicted at the end of my City on the Edge of Battle review. It's like, it's just going to be Cloud Galactus. It's not exactly Cloud Galactus, but it's very close.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But at least it had a dragon head and was yellow, and it was serpentine-ish.
I'll take what I can get at this point.
Yeah. Especially in light of Mechagodzilla City, I will take that. So,
yeah. And also, go ahead.
And then the fight with Godzilla, you totally nailed it on the head. Where you're like, this is the movie poster for the next 30 minutes.
Yeah,
like, oh my God, it really is.
Stare at the movie poster for 30 minutes. You get the same amount of enjoyment from looking at this movie because they stay in that pose forever. Like, Godzilla may take out his Scarlet form. Was like, oh no, that's too interesting. Take it away. Oh, yeah. They're lifting him up. Oh, but nothing really comes of that because that'd be too interesting.
Yeah.
Godzilla's fighting. Oh, but it's over already.
Yeah. Oh, he's moving his hand. Oh, it went right through.
He's like slowly moving his hand dramatically and slashing at Ghidorah's neck. It's like, okay, thanks for establishing that. They do it again. It's like, oh, well, we already know that. You didn't have to do that again.
Yes.
It's like, we need to spend more time. We need to eat up another 2 minutes for the runtime. Have him attack again. But the audience already saw that. Screw you.
So, and as this is going on, we do finally get the confrontation between Haruo and Metphies, right?
Yeah.
Which is...
and he takes, like, that's where, like I mentioned before, the real climax takes place, where he takes, Metphies takes Haruo on this, like, trippy, psychic journey through human history and saying, like, see, humanity was always destined for self-destruction, and I've been playing you like a card the entire time since the very beginning, and it's like, just give in to you, like, give in to your hatred, Haruo.
Right, yeah, that's very much what it was.
Yeah, and then, it's like, I believe the angry twin then takes Dr. Martin to the Mothra's egg, which we finally kind of, sort of, but not really see Mothra, where Mothra uses its psychic energy to form a bridge between Metphies and Huddle in order for the angry but now she's nice twin to communicate, to reach out to Huddles, telling him not to give up. It's a very short scene. It looks cool, save for the cheap, generic looking butterfly that is supposed to be Mothra.
Yeah, imagine a butterfly kite, and that's what you have.
Or rather, it felt like they just took any sort of like stock 3D model of a butterfly, slapped it into this movie and called it Mothra, because it's like, I guess it sort of has the head of Mothra, but the wing structure looks nothing like any sort of past incarnation of Mothra we've ever seen.
No.
It is possible to have a different wing pattern for Mothra, but it's like, it barely resembles Mothra. Like, Mothra it's not just a butterfly. It has a rather specific design, much like how Godzilla, even with Godzilla's not a generic dinosaur. At the very least, anime Godzilla still has the silhouette of Godzilla. Mechagodzilla, not so much. Ghidorah, barely. Rodan, as Omniviewer pointed out, we see the skeleton of a generic-looking pteranodon, which that is not what Rodan is supposed to be, and Mothra is not supposed to be a generic moth. It's supposed to have these like round wings, usually. At the very least, that's like the thing that most people remember are the round wings, and they don't do that either.
Of course not, and
a big bulbous head, which I don't think it really had.
You couldn't tell. It's basically in silhouette, and it's blocky silhouette at that. Yeah. And one thing I didn't understand is as they're going through, or they didn't establish well, was apparently that Haruo being angry was drawing Ghidorah, but they didn't really explain how there was that connection, unless Metphies is doing something.
He mentions Metphies mentioned how Haruo wishes to be rid of this awful existence, and that somehow means that Haruo wishes to be non-existent himself, which is what the Exifs want. So they're using Haruo's wish for non-existence, or wish to end his suffering, as a means of having Ghidorah come in and do just that.
I guess that's it. But it wasn't clearly explained or well thought out either. Go ahead.
It's like, because this is like a psychic battle, you could have some really cool conclusion where, you could have had, because this is an anime after all, you could have had like a very exciting moment, that final moment of fuck you, when Haruo just like finally rebelled against him. Instead, it was just as as mundane as the rest of this trilogy has been, where he just grabs his grandfather's head, which turns out to equal him grabbing Metphies' head in real life, and, breaking the seal that in Metphies' eye.
Oh my god! And as the psychic battle, which in my opinion sucked.
Barely a battle.
It's basically Haruo.
I don't hate it as much as you. I actually like it to an extent. But here's the thing: I mentioned before, and I still think now, this movie is only worth a single watch. So watching it again for the second time did no favors for me.
No, I can't. I can't believe you were able to sit through it a second time, because the battle, if you will, is basically like Haruo falling through an '80s,
Doctor Who
techno
intro.
Video. Yes, yeah, there you go. Because you don't get a lot of times that I'll go back to X-Men again. Like, Professor X has a battle on the psychic plane. It's usually really cool because you can do whatever there. You can turn into a giant, you can turn into a monster or whatever. This is just Haruo falling.
Like, the dark side of Professor X's mind resulted in this big ass motherfucker called Onslaught.
Right, exactly. They don't do anything cool like that. And you and I noticed this too. They literally, as they're replaying the kind of Haruo's grandfather thing,
they're repeating scenes from earlier movies. It's such like I get it. They're trying to take you on a retrospective look on their entire journey so far. But the filmmaker inside of me, or the film critic inside of me, is saying, no, you're just reusing all your assets from the past movies as a way of eating up time.
And then they show the same scene 2 or 3 times within the same 7-minute time frame. It was of like them running away from Godzilla's destruction in the first movie. Like really that lazy.
You know, I didn't want to get angry during this review, and I'm sure people are going to be looking at us and saying, oh, look at these butthurt fanboys. Look at how angry they're getting over this silly little filler of a trilogy. It's just like the more I think about it, the more I'm like, not so much offended, but more baffled. Again, baffled at just how many times the filmmakers were cutting corners, or were never trying to meet the audience halfway, or it's like there were many times where it's like they had a good idea, but they stopped just short of its execution.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I might be more mad at
I'm not so much mad at the filmmakers. I'm not so much mad at the film. I'm just constantly at every turn baffled by the decisions the filmmakers were making. It's like, huh? What? Why? How? What?
Yeah, and then maybe I get a little angry because I think about it too much, like trying to figure out how they got to this point, and I can't quite put it together. So it's frustrating.
Plus, I guess it's really fun when you get your emotions all riled up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, to be fair, you've had a couple months to digest this whole thing. I just saw it the other day, so
it's like I was prepared for this, but it turns out I wasn't.
Yeah, and then there's the they do eventually stop Ghidorah because Haru was able to overcome Metphies, pessimism, basically, and that enables Ghidorah to become corporeal, if I said that right, so that Godzilla can attack him, right?
I believe so.
And then there's what happens after Ghidorah, which was also kind of confusing to me, at least too, like in terms of why did they take this story route. Is there anything else you want to cover before we get to that part?
No, let's just get to the ending already.
Okay. So basically we see Haruo, and he's impregnated the one twin, yet seems to have a better relationship with the other twin.
It's a thing, like, maybe we misinterpreted. Maybe he didn't sleep with the angry one. Maybe he stayed with the nice one, slept with the nice one during that second intimate scene, and then he got the nice one pregnant and saved the angry one from being a damsel in distress, and then maybe he impregnated the nice one, but then had a heart-to-heart talking to the angry one when he's during the ending. It's like, again, very, very strange. It's like, no matter which twin he impregnated, it's still very strange that he did not talk to his pregnant quote-unquote wife at the very end.
Right, especially when they made it such a point to call it connecting. Like, you connected with her, supposedly on a deeper level than just physically,
You're
right?
You're not going to talk to her during your last, conversation before you leave? So let's go into it. Okay, so we have this sort of ending montage, very similar, I would say, to the ending of WALL-E, where you have the humans, they decide, the surviving humans, the day is saved, the exifs are gone. By the way, before we mention this, I do want to bring up, it's like, so apparently the exifs, it's their job to find victims for Ghidorah to eat. However, they end up sacrificing the old exif, the only other exif we see besides Metphies. So I'm thinking, how exactly do the exifs reproduce and continue doing their job if they keep dying at the hands of Ghidorah? Which I assume, okay, maybe that exif, he's old and he's retiring, and so he's allowing Ghidorah to kill him, to kill him. But I'm thinking, how exactly do the exifs procreate and continue on serving as Ghidorah's Silver Surfer, Silver Surfer, what do you call it? Allegory? No, when you're supposed to represent something else.
I guess the allegory stand-in, whatever.
Yeah, stand-in, yeah. How are they supposed to serve as the Silver Surfer stand-in if they can't reproduce, or if we only ever see Metphies and that old dude who died?
Right, which is, we talked about before, another thing that doesn't make sense towards their end game. I guess they want to die, but they also seem to want to bring the entire universe with them. But if they die with each planet they go to, you have to assume that there's a finite amount of exifs.
Unless they reproduce, but we never see that.
They're right.
We never see young Exifs. We never see any other Exifs besides just Metphies himself. So are there at least other Exifs out there in the universe? Are these the only Exifs?
Yeah, I don't get it. And the whole thing about why Ghidorah had to specifically attack Godzilla wasn't made really clear either. Like, does he have to eat a super monster, or does he have to eat the planet? Is it both? Does he have to eat the super monster first? That didn't go into that either.
It's just that he wants to eat everything, and that Godzilla was the perfect draw for him, I guess. But
then why not just eat the whole planet with Godzilla on it instead of was he like a cherry on top of an ice cream? You had to get him first?
Maybe.
Again, it's that baffled feeling you were talking about.
Yeah. It confused me. It confounds me. It makes me angry. It makes me want to hurt things. It doesn't. No, it doesn't. I'm just being overdramatic there for the sake of comedy. But as for the ending of this movie, so we mentioned before that, pretty much the Metphies is dead. The Exifs are dead, as far as we know. Everyone else is dead except for the Holtua and the surviving humans who did not follow Metphies and were sacrificed. By the way, we didn't mention that. The part where Metphies sacrificed all of his human followers was perhaps another one of the best scenes in the movie. It was creepy, It was minimalistic, it was like the perfect blend of psychological mindfuckery and horror.
Yeah, it really was, and it was a neat scene where they're before an altar, and Ghidorah's shadow kind of creeps along the floor, and as it touches the people, it physically takes their arm off or something like that until they're all killed. So that was a pretty cool scene, actually. It was kind of the scene of oh crap, we've bought into something bad here. As all the people are standing there. Now,
we never got a good look at how many humans were on Earth with Haruo and Metphies and Dr. Martin. But it made it felt like those were that was it. That all of the humans were with Metphies in that sacrifice scene. So the fact that there were still plenty of humans around was a bit confusing at the end.
Right, because where were they the rest of the time? It seemed
and it felt like Haruo and Dr. Martin were the only ones who weren't part of that cult.
Right.
But anyways, apparently there are still humans there. They decided to blend in, assimilate into the Holtua culture. They wear their clothes, they abandon their technology, they live a peaceful life, and we had this very nice montage, and Haruo eventually impregnates one of the twins. Nice one, angry one, who knows? They got the same expression now. Who cares? That's my ultimate saying. So eventually we get to the current time, and Dr. Martin says, "Hey, Haruo, I can activate the I was able to take some nanometal cells from this comatose." Oh yeah, we never mentioned that. Yuko is comatose, and the nanometal is essentially acting as a life support system for her, but she's never going to wake up. But she might as well be dead. In terms of the narration of the narrative, she is narratively dead.
Right.
Technically not, but she might as well be. So he's like, I took some nanometal cells from Yuko, and we're able to use technology again. And Haruo is like, if we start using technology again, we'll go on the same path that will eventually lead to our destruction, thus proving Metphies right. Which, again, I don't really see how technology is it's like one of those things where it's a very black and white look on nature versus technology, and how technology is the evil and it should be eradicated, which I believe is completely ridiculous. I mean, even
right.
If you've ever watched Beast Machines tackle that problem, idea of technology versus nature, and it handled that in a much better way, where it made the claim that we need a balance of both technology and nature to the perfect balance could lead to the perfect end result. Meanwhile, according to Gen Urobuchi, the writer of this whole trilogy, no, technology is bad.
Yeah, and it was strange because you got the sense earlier in the story that Martin was the rational one.
Yeah.
And yet he specifically says to Haruo that we can rebuild it. We can rebuild Mechagodzilla City. Well, you already know Mechagodzilla City was a bad thing.
True, yeah.
So why are you going to rebuild it? which again for this it made no sense in this character's motivations. Like you see him with the guy who was like nobody's being rational and looking at Ghidorah coming to destroy everything, and I guess could have been looked at as like, okay, we kind of saw what could be the bad side of religion. Here's the bad side of a scientific approach. But again, it didn't mesh with the way that the character portrayed himself earlier. Earlier, he was like a rational thinking person, like, oh, this is going to end badly. Yet he already knows how badly it'll end if they rebuild Mechagodzilla City, but he's like real pumped about building it up again. It was like, wait, this doesn't mesh with what you were doing earlier. You know, like right. He's not even like a scientist. A lot of times what you'll see is, if people talk about science being mad in a science fiction story, it's because people progress forward without considering the implications of what their discoveries will lead to. In this case, he already knew what the end game was and was going forward with it anyway. And he knew it was a bad end game, which didn't make any sense.
Right. And so this led to Haruo saying, you know what, I'm going to take Yuko's body, I'm going to take the last Vulture mech, I'm going to take all sources, all traces of nanometal, I'm going to kill myself with all this nanometal at the hands of Godzilla, because I also feel like I too am too dangerous for this society, and that if I guess like people have interpreted Haruo's suicide mission as like, oh, I should kill myself because I am also a danger to society, because the future generations will live off of my anger for Godzilla. I'm thinking, okay, so is this movie trying to say that you shouldn't work out your issues, and that it's better to give up than trying to work through your issues and letting go of your anger?
Right, especially when he has a kid on the way. I mean, how often
I'm too dangerous. I'm going to poison my kid's mind with my angry thoughts. I'm too dangerous. I should die.
So in the end, he bought into the pessimism anyway, I guess then, because it was like...
that's the thing, yeah. Him having to die, him killing himself contradicts the entire message of this movie. This entire trilogy. That's the most hilarious thing ever. The movie ends with a big fuck you to the audience, saying, we're promoting this message, but we're gonna have this character kill himself just for an emotional what the fuck ending.
Right, because the ultimate redemption could be, if you're going to be a parent, and as you guys know I am, like, the main thing you can do is to teach your kids, these are the mistakes that I have made. Try to avoid these mistakes in your life going forward. And that's how you learn from your mistakes, and you pass it on, that wisdom, to the next generation as to watch out for these pitfalls. So Haruo, and he already had a setup where his kid is going to be raised in an environment where, like, they get along with the world around them. They're not in conflict with it like he was. So it would have been a perfect time to break this cycle there with, like, hey, my child, son, daughter, whatever, I had these issues with anger. I had this burning desire to take down Godzilla. You don't need to do that. You guys can live in conjunction with him on this planet. That's kind of what they're leading to, but that's screw it. We'll just kill Haruo off because, he can't possibly better himself going forward and be a different character. He's got to be brought down by the worst aspects of his nature, as opposed to even trying to redeem himself.
It's it's just a very messy ending. It's like, I can tell the writer would really want to leave some sort of impact on the audience. And so it's like, no, we're not satisfied with this happy ending. I'm Gen Orobuchi. I know how to tug at people's strings. So it's like, I'm going to create this convoluted ending just to leave some sort of shock value on my audience. And again, some people may like that. We in particular don't think it works.
It can work in the right setting. Rod Serling, for instance, was great at doing that, right? With like the Twilight Zone. How many great episodes did you see of that where people don't realize until it's too late, but then they have to go down this path? Where you didn't really feel like that with Haruo. You didn't.
There are plenty of stories that involve the hero performing a heroic sacrifice for the betterment of mankind. A
Tale of Two Cities, right? It's a far, far better thing I do.
I'm trying to think of like other ones. I know I've written to certain people where I shared my thoughts and opinions on it, and I brought several examples of people who provided like very heroic sacrifices.
Oh, we could go to the original Godzilla for Serizawa.
Yeah, that was the only that self-sacrifice. I feel like that was far more. That was he deserved that ending. Like the movie, it's like Haruo does not deserve that ending. It didn't feel like he, within the situation, within the context of that story, it felt like he didn't really need to do that. With Daisuke Serizawa, you can feel like there was no other way. His back was against a corner. He had to kill himself. Otherwise, people are going to beg him or force him to make more of the oxygen destroyer.
Right. But you didn't feel that way with Haruo. And Serizawa had also realized he wasn't going to get the girl that he loved, presumably because of their connection.
He had nothing on this planet to live for.
Right, Haruo's got a family. Yeah. But then doesn't even bother to say goodbye to his wife. He just gets up and leaves to go kill himself.
As far as we know, according to what the movie showed us.
Right. I guess you can make the case that because the twins had a psychic connection by talking to the one, he was talking to the other. But
that's just bullshit.
Yeah. So...
let's see. I'm trying to think of like another story where the main character would like heroically kill themselves. Because I'm sure there is one out there. Like, I'm sure I'm already going to think of one as soon as we end this recording.
Another good example, we talked about this before, is in the original Dark Phoenix saga, where Jean briefly gets control of herself.
She sacrificed. Yeah, and she sacrificed herself. It's like, Scott, you have to kill me in order to save this world. Again, it's like, in order for a hero to sacrifice themselves means that their back is against a corner and there is no other option available. And the way they executed the heroic sacrifice, Haruo sacrifice, it doesn't feel that way in the slightest.
No, it felt like he had totally valid other options, which could have not only benefited him, but everybody else around him.
The biggest thing is, maybe he could have put it on autopilot. And sure, somebody could say, what if there is no autopilot? We don't know that, because the movie didn't give us that choice.
And here's the other thing. A core of a lot of stories is those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. By killing himself, he cuts off the next generation from doing the mistakes that he made as well.
Now,
so you can't...
According to the post-credit scene... It feels like after the humans have genetically assimilated into the Holtua tribe, we see the human Holtua future generations apparently having a ceremony where they burn away their fears and angers and bad feelings.
Yeah, at first it looks like the end of the Wicker Man, where you've got this effigy that they're burning. So I guess they symbolically tie up their knots and throw it in there into the fire. But meanwhile, you see the one sister and what's I guess is her child with Haruo being like, "Oh, isn't this nice? Remember when Dad thought he had no other option but to kill himself?
Good thing we did this in his honor."
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Again, it's just another case of where they take the character doesn't seem to fit with the actions the character took anyway, right?
Right. Just it's just nothing really lines up.
Right. And he takes Yuko with him, which I guess is sort of putting her out of her misery.
I guess, yeah. I mean, you could have just, blown her up with it. I feel like there could have been so many more alternatives to this ending the more I think about it. Right. And you're going to start to get baffled and then angry. Watch. Yeah. It's going to happen. and then your anger is going to call Ghidorah down here. Oh, no!
Yeah. And then it'll be in trouble. The good news is you have 2 twins to hook up with before this all goes down.
Oh, thank God.
So, yeah.
What's that meme? It's don't care, got laid or something.
Yeah. And the best news is they don't care which one you take. So it works out even better. I'm sorry.
Apparently.
Yeah.
It's all a matter of connecting life, Matt.
There you go. But before you jump and drink...
It's connecting life.
Exactly. But before you jump in Draco's Zone and fly to Godzilla, just give me a call first, okay? I'll talk you down, brother. I'll talk you down. Okay.
Okay, it's like, I'm gonna do it, man. No, I
Yeah.
really shouldn't be making fun of this.
No, but it's just that nothing else we could do.
We laughed. This is how we deal with our pain, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
through comedy.
Yeah.
Laughter.
Exactly.
We
Inappropriate
use
comedy.
laughter. Inappropriate laughter can heal all wounds.
Yes. It's part of the coping, right? Isn't there like, what is it, anger, confusion, bargaining? I don't know. We're at the laughing part of it. So, coping with what this trilogy could have been.
It's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So, final thoughts, man, on Godzilla the Planet Eater and the entire trilogy as a whole, now that you've seen the whole thing.
Well, it's no secret. I'll give the Planet Eater first. I gave the last movie 1 star. I will bump this up to 2 stars.
Okay.
Because there was some interesting concepts that were touched on. The whole role of religion in science and society was kind of cool. The way that they touched on that. Mm-hmm. The final confrontation with Metphies was pretty good. Metphies played a pretty good villain. In terms of like being a manipulator. But again, I can't really recommend this to people other than maybe one initial viewing if you're a Godzilla completist like you and I are, to see everything Godzilla-ish. If you
sorry, I just found it. Okay. I was thinking, like, what was one thing that I brought up to someone in terms of a good example of a heroic sacrifice? Goku in the Cell Saga.
Yes, there you go. There's an excellent one.
And eventually,
yes.
Passing on the torch to his son Gohan to be the next hero. Even if that didn't pan out in the Buu Saga, in the context of the Cell Saga, it worked.
Right.
Okay,
right.
There we go. Wanted to get that off my chest, because I knew I was going to hate myself for not bringing it up.
I'm glad you got that. But yeah, overall, the trilogy, I was very disappointed by it. The whole thing could have been done without Godzilla, which is what really confuses me as to why they would, and we'll talk about this very soon, but why would you drop Godzilla into this unless if you were trying to draw in a fan base, for this, you had this idea for a movie and you wanted to draw in a fan base, and then you just totally throw it out the window as to what that fan base came here for. And again, not that you can't do things differently. I think you and I very soon are going to talk about Into the Spider-Verse, right?
Oh yeah.
And there was an excellent example of okay, we're going to do things differently to draw in a new audience by providing Miles as the predominant Spider-Man, but it's cool. You'll still get your Peter and different versions of Peter, but we'll make Miles a likable character. We'll give you plenty of Miles to like as well, which is you did not get with this new version of Godzilla, where there just wasn't a whole lot to like, or even a whole lot of him either. Yeah, that's about it. It's a shame because I'm so excited for this trilogy that I went to with the idea.
And this was the entire reason why we made this Godzilla in animation in celebration of the Godzilla anime coming
out. Exactly. Although it was still a blast with you and hopefully all the fans. Yeah, to go back and look at the Arctic Giant and the Godzilla 98 and all that other stuff.
Totally.
So what are your thoughts on
not so much the
everything?
Destination, but the journey along the way.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we were able to get our thoughts down. So if any of your fans or my fans ever want to know our full thoughts on these movies, we have them recorded here for as long as YouTube shall stand, until Ghidorah eventually comes and wipes out everything.
There we go. In fact, to prove I'm better than Haruo, I'll have to make sure my kids listen to this and not make the same mistake I did of watching the Godzilla anime trilogy. So, listen, girls, learn from your dad's mistakes.
Don't watch this movie.
Yeah.
I'm currently dealing with my rage right now.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, as for my thoughts, it's again, a series of very interesting, very fascinating, very interesting concepts that are unfortunately either underdeveloped or not given enough time, filled with a lot of very stagnant, uninteresting, generic sci-fi tropey characters. The sci-fi itself is not all that special in comparison to other stories. The whole angry protagonist is not as special as what we've seen in other stories. The whole my best friend betrayed me is now my ultimate enemy has been done before. The idea of Godzilla taking over the world has actually been done before in stories like what was it? Godzilla Cataclysm from IDW Comics.
Right.
We've even like Chris Elchison, I believe, did a much better job of a post-apocalyptic Godzilla universe with Godzilla X the Kaiju Killer, his fan film. It's just a lot of ideas and stories, story beats, a lot of everything in here I feel like has been done much better elsewhere. It's just that it has never been done all in one package with Godzilla's name slapped before. And, that's the key drawing point, that draws many fans and what brings fans to like this series. That's perfectly fine. But for me, it's just not, that novelty factor just is not enough. Maybe it's not a novelty. Maybe you genuinely do think all these ideas are genuinely good and these characters are genuinely interesting. That's perfectly fine. Just that I, unfortunately, can only interpret these as flaws, and they do not help whatsoever in my enjoyment or lack thereof of these films. And I enjoyed it, this third film initially when I saw it in theaters, but watching it for a second time just proves how right I was, that this is worth a single viewing and nothing more. So I'm going to be very generous and still give it a 3 out of 5. If I went by a 0.5 system, I would have given it a 2.5, but no, it's worth a look, especially if you've seen the first 2 movies and you want to know how it ends. Because it's like, this is what they were saving all their best ideas for, even if they weren't executed all that well. And if you haven't seen the trilogy, I would recommend it only if you are like a really diehard completionist, and you really need to see all the Godzilla films. Or if you're just a casual Godzilla fan, I would recommend it if you're like very, very morbidly curious as to how this little experiment turned out. But if you're just a casual anime fan and you're not a Godzilla fan and you want to get into Godzilla, this is not for you. I would say only watch this if you're all... It's funny, like, this supposedly Toho said they wanted to make this movie for non-Godzilla fans, but I feel like the only people who could find enjoyment in this movie are Godzilla fans.
Yeah, are we ready to get into the whole why the movies were made thing? Because I know we have a couple ideas.
Right.
Yeah, I've been bouncing an idea around in my head. OmniViewer did 2 really good videos on this, but apparently there was an interview that came out, right, where it was said that the writer and the director were told, and feel free to fact check me on this, or if you know it better than I'm saying, that Toho didn't want them to do any monster fights and wanted to minimize the amount of Godzilla, and specifically hired a writer who was not a Godzilla fan and knew nothing about Godzilla. Right.
They wanted to pull, in my opinion, I felt like they were trying to pull a Christopher Nolan, where it's like, let's have somebody who's a good writer, but is not tied in by any sort of fanboyist bias. So, like, let's have a guy who knows how to do good stories and can make a good story out of this with no preconceived notions as to what makes a good Godzilla film to begin with.
Right, which can be done. I mean, look at The Dark Knight. Right?
Yeah,
we know Christopher Nolan's not a huge Batman fan, but
and Christopher Nolan is totally not a comic book guy, as far as I know.
Right,
he's become a Batman fan. He's a fan of the character, I'm sure. Why else would he pick that choice?
Right,
those films to work on. But again, it's like, he has no comic background. He's more like an artsy film director, and he's like, okay, well, I'm just going to do my thing. And for many people, the Dark Knight trilogy is not their thing, but for a good majority of audiences, it totally worked for them.
Right.
I guess that's what they were approaching for. And here's the thing, everybody. This may shock a lot of Godzilla fans, but Godzilla is not popular in Japan. Like, sure, Shin Godzilla was a huge success, but it wasn't Godzilla that drew them in. It was more of the political commentary that resonated with a lot of Japanese people, especially like anyone from like adult, like 20s and older. It really connected with them in terms of like especially their like resentment against like Abe and the current state of the Japanese government. So having someone like Hideaki Anno with like this strong proclamation, this strong voice to say our system is flawed and needs to be changed now, that resonated with a lot of fans, a lot of Japanese people. And so they watched them, they enjoyed it, and made Shin Godzilla into the success that it was, not because of Godzilla, but because of its message and its themes that were present in that movie. Outside of that, people could care less about Godzilla.
But I think you've explained this to me multiple times, comparing it to like how people look at, say, the Looney Tunes here in the U.S.
It's like, they exist. We know of them, but we're not all hardcore fans of it.
Right. There's no like Looney Tune conventions, I don't think, to speak of. Not, for instance, like let's go to Star Trek has like a very hardcore fan base. They have conventions and stuff. That
does not happen for Godzilla. And people can have approached me and say, "What are you talking about? There's a Godzilla museum. There's a Godzilla hotel. There's a kaiju bar. There's a Godzilla statue." It's like, yes, but those are mainly for foreign tourists.
Right.
If you go, from what I understand, and I've even had some of my Japanese friends or students who have who visited these places, and they say what they mostly find at these locations are mainly Asian foreigners, Asian fans, like Chinese people, Vietnamese, Korean, Thai, some Indonesians, I believe. These are mainly like the Kaiju Bar, the Godzilla Hotel. These are mainly to attract foreigners, not Japanese locals themselves.
Right.
And so it's possible that they made this trilogy as a way of appealing to trying to bring in new Japanese fans into the Godzilla franchise. And it's like, since Japanese fans, and also remember that during the early 2000s, when they were making these Godzilla movies, there was a steady decline as people grew less and less interested in giant monster material. And even the material that we have nowadays that's giant monster related, it's never really goes on beyond Ultraman, Ultraman, Sentai, and Kamen Rider. But for Sentai and Kamen Rider, you never see any toys or merchandise of the monsters themselves. It's always the robots and the morphers and the toys and gadgets and gizmos and transformations that the main heroes do. The only monster toys you ever see is Ultraman, but I feel like Ultraman is not as popular as it once was. Maybe it is popular for kids because they have to turn it into a big old toy commercial with transformations and collectible gadgets and doodads, with some monster toys here and there. So like outside of Ultraman monsters, there's not really that big of a draw for the local Japanese people. So it's like, again, Toho probably said, again, in one theory, they said, okay, let's have a Godzilla anime trilogy, because Japanese people, they love anime and they love anime tropes. So let's do that with Godzilla, with more focus on the cliche anime tropes, less on the monster action themselves, because we already know they're not interested in that.
I guess, but if your goal is to bring in new fans, wouldn't you think that they might go back and check out the older stuff, and then when it doesn't jive with this new thing,
and like, here's the thing, like,
not be fans?
They mentioned before that they want to bring in non-fans, and especially like a more diverse audience. They mentioned specifically women, want to bring in women as well. And I guess women enjoy their broody anime heroes. I know a lot of female fans of anime love those broody anime protagonists.
What is it, like the kind of the bad boy that they want to see broken type of thing and bring around? Is that
sort of? Yeah, kind of. I think so. That's maybe that they were hoping like female fans would see that in hot roll. But here's the thing: they claim that according to everything that Toho said in the interviews, they want to make this for non-fans here in Japan. But everything they did contradicts that. They released it in movie theaters, but they only released it in very limited releases, so barely anyone saw them, and they barely marketed these movies beyond the first one. Barely anyone has heard about them. And then finally enough, they put all their chips on the Netflix basket. Here's the thing. Netflix is not popular and has yet to catch on in Japan. So if you're doing most of your marketing on Netflix, that shows to me that you're going more for the international market, not so much the Japanese market. So you end up creating a trilogy of movies that's for one audience, but is being marketed and being mostly seen by a completely other market.
So wait, what you're saying, and I want you to sit down when I say this, is that what they're trying to get doesn't mesh with the actions that they're taking, similar to the characters in the story, right?
Holy fuck.
Yeah. Whoa, man. Whoa. It's like an inception of an inception going on here. No, but that makes total sense. Like, let me give you, for instance, just today, I went and they do the Fathom events. I know they have those in Japan, but they'll show
definitely not.
Okay, but you know what a Fathom event is, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, today I went to see, I took the whole family to see a double feature of the new animated Death of Superman and Reign of the Superman.
Okay.
Death of Superman, very good.
Death of Superman for families.
Of course. You know, I take my kid. They need to know, Andres.
They need to know the facts of life.
Damn right.
The death of a beloved, iconic American hero.
Well, that's why I waited till they did his double feature with Reign of, so I know he comes back. But anyway.
Okay.
But anyway, my point here being that the Fathom event is always a limited release. Yeah. And when you do a limited release like that, everybody in the theater was a hardcore Superman fan. People went there with like the Superman shirts on and all this other stuff. Yeah. So the point there wasn't to necessarily do this Fathom event release to draw in a new audience. It was, we will do this knowing that our hardcore fans will come see this and then still download it in 2 days from now, like I am anyway. Yeah. So, because I'm a sucker. But that logic makes sense. It's the complete reverse, like you're saying with the Godzilla trilogy, where if you're going to do a limited release, you would have to think that you're drawing in your Godzilla fans and not new people because it's a limited release,
also,
right? Like
I don't think their release is that limited, because I live in Gifu, okay? Gifu is like in the middle of nowhere in Japan. It's like the middle of the countryside in Japan. So you expect Gifu to be the last place to get a theatrical showing of Godzilla. Nope. I got all 3 movies in my local theater, and I live in the countryside.
Oh,
in the middle of Japan, in the middle of backwoods Japan.
So then that theory doesn't seem to be holding out very well, right?
I'm just saying, like, when they say limited release, I don't think it's as limited as people think it is. And keep in mind, these movies perform terribly in the box office, but here's the thing, they say, oh, these movies performed well for a limited release. I don't really believe them. I just feel like that's just a bunch of corporate talk to save face.
I also, have you seen new women and children fans of Godzilla popping up as a result?
I just see a bunch of older gentlemen and like young, maybe some teenage boys, maybe a few couples, but that's it. It's like the most in my movie theaters, whenever seeing all 3 of these movies, is usually like 20 to 30 people. And that's not a lot of people, really. It sounds a lot like a lot. That's like a classroom inside an entire big movie theater that can fit in like so many more people, like maybe 100 people or so. Like when I went to see Dragon Ball Super Broly, it was packed, man.
Yeah, I can believe that. And I can't believe it's bringing new audiences with the way that they had done it has been as successful as they're saying. Like, granted, this is a small sample size, but I used briefly before the example of Into the Spider-Verse introducing new versions to people. So since that movie has come out, at my job, I work at a school, and I do the comic book club there, and people know me as a writer and a big sci-fi fan. Yeah, I'm super cool teacher.
And also I wish we had a comic club back in elementary school.
Yeah, it is packed. But since we've done that, kids love it. It's very cool. Mm-hmm. But since I've started doing that, and since the movie came out, more importantly, a ton of students and staff have come to me and said, hey, I really like female staff, for instance, have come to me and said, hey, I really liked Into the Spider-Verse. What's up with this Spider-Gwen character? Can you tell me more about her? I'd like to check her out. And I'm like, oh yeah, Spider-Gwen's cool. Check this out. Or, other fans who didn't know about these universal Spider-Mans, like minority students. Hey, I didn't know that there was a black Hispanic Spider-Man. Miles, that's really cool. Where can you tell me where I can read more about it?
Pig Spider-Man?
Yeah. What 3 pigs came up to me and told me that, and then asked me how to build their houses.
Fucking like Porky Pigs up to you. Finally, Spider Pig represented me.
I don't need to make this direct correlation of like,
Sure, sure.
females to this, whatever. But, or even like people say, I didn't know that there was like an anime type with Penny, and that be whatever. And I'm generalizing it a little bit, but certainly more diverse, and not just diverse in terms of like race and ethnicity, but people who weren't necessarily comic book fans are coming to me and saying like, hey, I didn't know there's all these different versions. I'd like to know more about them. I haven't seen like any kind of chatter with that in any of like, you and I are both in multiple monster groups, like new people coming on and saying, I was not a Godzilla fan before this trilogy came out, and now I am.
Oh yeah, you're never gonna see those kind of people. Like the only people who I don't think even anime fans really watch these movies. At least I don't think so as far as I know. Like the only people who talks about these movies are mainly the hardcore fans themselves.
Yeah, even Netflix buries it. Like you have to put it on your watch list or it's not popping up that
Also,
it's new.
how sad is it that the only Godzilla movies now available on Netflix are these and the '98 film?
Extremely sad. However, I will gladly watch
shout out to
98
Patrick
film.
Galvin for pointing that out to me.
Yeah. That is really, really sad. Yeah, when you look at the 98 film being the crown jewel of that collection,
Right.
that is sad.
So I mentioned before the idea that this was made for new fans by downplaying the traditional aspects of Godzilla. And then I had a theory in my non-spoiler review. It's like, what if they had big plans for a bigger series? Because there were reports that they want to make this into a TV series, which nowadays I'm like really stretching my imagination to see how they could stretch their imagination to a full series. But Toho said no, they just want 3 movies. So I had the theory that it's like, what if they wanted to do? They had plans for a big story, but then they were told, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that, and it's like, oh, okay. So we still want to go with our ideas, but we are also going to follow Toho's restrictions. So I'm thinking it's like, again, they had these very ambitious ideas, but a not so ambitious execution. So I'm thinking maybe they had a big plan, but then they had to condense it all into this very subpar 3-act story. Now, here's the third theory.
Yeah.
And this is the big one.
Yeah.
This was brought up to me. Like, I would say it's not to me personally, but I made a post on Facebook, on the Facebook group Toku Legion, where I asked the question, why did Toho, if Toho's making this for a primarily Japanese audience who's not so big into Godzilla, why is most of their focus on Netflix, which is something that most Japanese people don't have? And Robert Scott Field, Mr. M11 himself, brought up the idea that all of this was a way to, what do you call it?
Tax write-off?
This whole entire anime venture has been one giant tax write-off in order to recuperate from the success that Shin Godzilla was going on 3 years prior.
Right, to offset the profits they made,
right.
More or less, right?
So here's the thing. Apparently, according to Robert Scott Field, Toho wasn't aware that Shin Godzilla would become the big success that it was, where, it got praised, it became like the #1 movie in Japan, it got was the equivalent of a Japanese Oscar for best movie ever. And, they thought, oh, it's just going to be this movie we're going to release, experimental movie we're going to release between the Hollywood movies. Oh, shit! People loved it! And, of course, the more money you make, the more money you owe to the government. At least that's how I understand it. Am I right, Matt?
Yes, totally.
Okay, so if you make a shit ton of money off of Shin Godzilla, then you are owed more money. You're obligated to give more money in taxes to the government. So perhaps to offset that, as you said, it's possible that they may have made this trilogy as cheaply as possible, as as cheaply as possible in order to have a loss, but not too much of a loss, to then turn it into a write-off so that they can then keep a lot of that money. Because I'm sure there's still like 2 going on 3 years now. They're still probably paying a lot of money of that Shin Godzilla money to the government every year. But with this tax write-off, they probably don't have to give as much money to the government anymore.
Right,
At least for now.
right, and I'm not always super big on conspiracy theories, but this one does seem to hold some merit. Um, because, like, especially the more you talk about it, like, if the release wasn't as limited as they're saying, then we can assume they lost more money than they're even kind of portraying, because, oh, it's a limited release, so it did well on its limited release. But if it really was truly what they're calling a limited release, but really a more widespread release, I would assume that would take more money from them. And I'm learning about how Netflix works for paying for things. So Netflix would basically pay Toho like a certain amount of one giant check.
One giant check for only one time. They don't get residuals. It's just a one-time payment. Am I right?
Yes, exactly. Which would be like why they could set themselves up to not make as much money. So if they had made it for like X amount of money and then sell it to Netflix for Y, they could automatically take a loss on it in that respect. Does that make sense?
Right. They don't have to worry about how much these movies are going to make in the long run. They've already did the deal with Netflix since the beginning of last year, and it's all done and over with. So they already know how much this movie has, and will make in one fell swoop.
And it probably helps, I guess, to farm it to a company like Netflix, which is overseas for them. Yeah. So it even more obscures things from the government.
Oh, probably, yeah. And it does make sense why a lot of the movies have very interesting ideas, because it does match with all the restrictions they placed on them, that they placed on the creative writers, and why a lot of the ideas feel so lackluster, because perhaps they were told this to everyone, that these movies were made to fail. So perhaps Gen Urobuchi and everyone else was like, why bother trying if these movies are destined to fail? So it's like, well, I know these movies are gonna bomb, so I might as well have some fun while I'm at it. But I can't try too hard, because then I'll make my boss angry.
I guess it seems like you didn't put much effort into it either, which is what you see time and time again when you get a writer.
Oh yeah, you get someone who makes like the best out of a bad situation.
Right.
But we don't get that here at all.
No. Or you get somebody who gets or the reverse, but you get somebody who gets a well-defined property with a fan base and doesn't care about it, doesn't put much effort into it, doesn't do much research on it. And in this case, might have been being told was being told by corporate not to do so. So, for instance, like the Dragon Ball Evolution movie, which is terrible, the writer of that has said, like, yeah, I wasn't a fan and didn't do any research on it. I just kind of half-assed put this together, despite the fact that Dragon Ball has a rabid fan base, right?
Yeah.
Or it'd be like if somebody came to me and you to write something like, I don't know, a My Little Pony movie, which we're not like fans of, but we know it has a rabid fan base.
Right. And we're gonna get all their money by taking advantage of their passion and fandom.
So yeah, it's very confusing and baffling. Like you said, I can see the case that Robert Scott-Field was making there. Lining up. We'd have to like look at Toho's books. I don't even know if they released their profit margin and stuff.
I doubt it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like this is gonna be unless like somebody, I know like the creators behind this anime trilogy vehemently defend their work, and they're very proud of it, and they're like, we don't care what the what they call traditionalist fans think. We're proud that they stuck to their guns, and you know what? I respect that. It's, from what it seems, they're proud of their work, and I feel like maybe they did do the best. But if they're lying and they're saying, this whole venture was just, one big glorified paycheck to them, and they decide years down the line to finally admit why they did what they did, if this is the case, then, so be it. But unless that ever happens, we'll most likely never know. I mean, it took for decades for like Jun Fukuda to say, yeah, I did the 70s Godzilla movies as a paycheck. I'm not a fan of Godzilla. I don't even like any of those movies that I made.
Right. Right.
Who knows if that will happen in this case? Maybe Gen Urobuchi would say, yeah, I phoned it in with these movies. Again, who knows? Because of course, like, the Japanese mentality is, you clearly don't bite the hand that feeds you. So I doubt any of them would ever say anything like that until long since the fact, since after the fact. But for now, it'll remain a mystery as to how these movies turn out the way that they did. But also, like I said before, time and time again throughout this review, this mystery is certainly way more interesting to dig into than the themes and the what do you call it? The philosophical themes and conflicts within the movies themselves.
Right, because we said before,
the themes and messages, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, you could have done these movies totally without Godzilla, because anybody you draw into this, you want to draw new people into the fan base. They're not going to like what the rest of the Godzilla body of work is if they like this, for the most part. There might be some who do, but for the most part, if that was your key to drawing a different demographic, I just don't see it working, because you could just release this movies without Godzilla if you just wanted to do a sci-fi story and tell these very surface level deep thoughts. You could have done this over without Godzilla and then avoided this entire controversy and drew attention to it, unless if your key was to draw attention to it so you could point out that it was a failure. Right, because if they just released this as, say, I don't know, like Return to Earth. Okay, let's just give it that title. And it excluded Godzilla. Would it have gotten the attention it did not being a Godzilla anime?
Totally not, yeah.
Right, so...
I mean, like, I'm sure like, there was... I in the very beginning of this when this trilogy first started, I made comparison to an anime that Polygon also made called Knights of Sidonia. It's essentially the same plot, but... done much better, I would believe. And that's because it was all based off of pre-existing manga that was already thought and planned ahead.
So it's very strange. It's very interesting to think about. I don't have an explanation for this.
For anyone else out there, I would say, I would not recommend this unless to the highest of, hardcore completionists out there, Godzilla completionists out there. Otherwise, watch Devilman Crybaby on on Netflix, watch Knights of Sidonia, watch Attack on Titan, let's see, watch The Big O, there's some cool monster stuff in there, as well as giant robot stuff, let's see, Gridman, that's the number one thing, yeah, go watch SSSS.Gridman, do that.
Yes, and if most people listening probably have, you haven't seen a lot of the other animated Godzillas, we'd say, definitely go watch The Arctic Giant. You can find it on YouTube.
Oh yeah, for free, easily. Yeah. Go watch Godzilla, the series, the follow-up to the 98 series movie. It's already available on DVD. You can do that. You can watch Hanna-Barbera. It's some episodes I bet are on YouTube or Dailymotion, or you can get season 1 on DVD if those videos are still around. Yeah, and they're okay. Oh, definitely check out the Shin Godzilla. It was very cool. We enjoyed that a lot. But I guess number one, it's very sad to think that like a 20-year-old cartoon is still the best representation of Godzilla we've gotten yet. Yes. In fact, the two best ones are the one that came out before there was a Godzilla with the Arctic Giant. Yeah. And then, believe it or not, the animated one that was a follow-up to the 98 American Godzilla is the best one. Of course. How could I forget? Nothing can top Bambi Meets Godzilla. Oh, true. Yes, that goes without saying. That's the best anime ever. It truly is. It truly is. The motivations of the characters in that make a lot more sense than the motivations of the characters in the Godzilla animated trilogy. That's for sure. And Godzilla does more in that anime than here. He actually walks. So yes, he does. Because in this movie, he did not walk. He did. I stand by that. So to end things up for now, until the next animated Godzilla arises, however many years from now, where can people find you until then? Can follow me on Facebook. Matt Denyon is my personal page, but follow me there, please. I'll be your friend. And Matthew Denny is where I put all my author stuff. Of course, follow both of us, please, on Kaiju versus Cancer's Facebook page. And you teased a little bit earlier, we are very close to putting together a very comprehensive anthology involving all kinds of superheroes, and I was counting yesterday, well over a dozen writers, and all the proceeds will go to benefit St. Jude's Children's Cancer Research Hospital. It'll be a mix of prose stories and comics. You again will get another story in there, right, with Draco Azul. Oh yeah.
Yep, he is in a very cool story. My character Raptor appears in several stories. We have Joe Sergey Skygirl, which I know is a big fan base, will be in there. Who else am I forgetting, Andres, that we have in there already?
Let's see. Did you mention Denny already? Or
no,
he's doing a story, but in the form of a comic.
Yeah, Denny's doing a Martial Star. Our friend Alan O.W. Barnes is doing a comic.
Oh, yeah.
With his characters from Big in Japan. Zach Cole
of course,
has contributed a story.
We contributed a story in the form of a comic, which you can buy on Amazon for $2.
Yes, yeah, of course. My brother Mark Denyon did a story with his characters from his books. And all of these characters are from pre-existing books. It's not like they were just made up for this, which I thought was cool too. So
yeah,
people
it's like the Avengers of charity stories.
Yes, yeah.
Charity-driven stories.
Yes. And the neat thing is, it's not just the anthology of independent stories taking place, separately from each other. It's really one narrative over a bunch of stories.
Oh, yeah, totally. Every character has their own perspective, and which all culminates in one continuous storyline. Yes,
which a big hand clap to all of the authors, because I know that wasn't easy for them to necessarily operate within those parameters, but they all did a fantastic job of it. So.
Oh yeah.
All right, so that's where you can follow me. Yep, thank you so much.
Excellent, and oh yeah, you also got an Instagram as well, right?
Yeah, Instagram and Twitter, which I use on occasion. So, please follow me there as well.
All right, and you can follow me here on the Kaiju Noir channel. You can also check out my upcoming comic book, Primal Warrior Draco Azul, on the Facebook page of the same name. And you can also check out any of the work that I have done in the description below. I have provided links to the stuff that I have worked on in the past as a writer and or editor. And be sure to follow the Kaiju vs. Cancer page as Matt described. So, thank you very much, everybody. And for the last time, unless another animated incarnation arises, this has been Godzilla in Animation, hosted by me, Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and
by me, Matthew Denyon.
And until next time, everybody, take care.